Tia Torres never set out to become famous, and fame was never what drove her. What drove her was a single decision made in a Los Angeles animal shelter, a moment where she looked at a dog nobody wanted and decided that simply wasn't good enough. And that decision pulled her into 3 decades of rescue work that became one of the most watched animal welfare series in television history. When Animal Planet canceled Pit Bulls and Parolees in 2022, the fan response was immediate and loud. But what happened after the cameras stopped rolling was something different entirely. Lawsuits, money running out, betrayals from people she had welcomed into her own rescue, a streaming platform that collapsed before it ever found its footing. And through all of it, a woman who simply refused to quit. What follows is the real story of Tia Torres, where she came from, what the show cost her, and how she has kept her mission alive since the television world moved on without her. Born on June 11, 1960 in Southern California, Tia Maria Torres grew up in a household built more on grit than on security. Her parents separated early, and her stepmother moved into that gap in ways that genuinely mattered, teaching Tia that animals were nature's gifts, that discipline and compassion worked together rather than against each other, and that loyalty could be found in places most people never thought to look. Money was tight throughout her childhood, and her father's absence made the animals around her, dogs, cats, horses, into something more than companionship. They were presence that stayed, and that distinction planted itself deep. It would shape every decision she made for the next 50 years. At 17, she left home. Not quietly and not without company. She loaded up 2 Arabian horses, an Angora goat, and a Catahoula leopard dog named Cougar, and she started moving. The years that followed weren't built for comfort. She slept in trucks and horse trailers, navigating a kind of rootlessness that would have worn down most people's sense of purpose. Tia never lost hers. Those difficult stretches didn't make her more careful about who and what she invested herself in. They made her more certain. The animals stayed with her when nothing else did, and that fact became the foundation of everything that eventually rose up around it. The rough years weren't a detour from her life's work. They were its origin. Before she ever found the dogs, before the rescue center and the television cameras, Tia's life moved through territory that would seem unrelated if you didn't know where it was headed. She served in the military. She drove trucks across the country. She spent years working as a counselor for young gang members in Los Angeles, sitting across from teenagers who had made catastrophic decisions and trying to figure out what they actually needed rather than what everyone had already decided they deserved. That work was hard. It was sometimes dangerous, and it taught her something that eventually became the philosophical spine of everything she built afterward. People written off by society aren't broken past the point of repair. They're just not being offered anything worth holding on to. She saw it clearly in the teenagers she counseled on those Los Angeles streets. She would see the exact same thing in the pit bulls she would spend the rest of her life trying to save. The encounter that changed the entire direction of her life happened at a local animal shelter, and it arrived without warning. A brindle-colored pit bull had been pulled from a violent crime scene, the kind of origin story that usually ends with a dog sitting in a kennel until time simply runs out. This one walked up to Tia's young daughters and settled in beside them, calm and gentle, in a way that dismantled every dangerous myth she'd ever heard attached to the breed. Local regulations prohibited pit bull adoptions in the area, but Tia's background working with animal control gave her a route around that barrier. She took the dog home, named him Tatanka, and in doing so quietly wrote the first page of a completely different life. That one dog started it. Everything else grew from there. Villa Lobos had originally operated as a sanctuary for wolves and wolf dog mixes, but the center's direction shifted as Tia's understanding of where the need was greatest became clearer. In March of 1999, she launched the Pit Bull Support Group in direct partnership with Los Angeles Animal Services, offering low-cost spaying and neutering, training, and real practical support for owners who had no other place to turn. That group ran successfully for over 11 years, quietly proving that the public fear attached to pit bulls had far more to do with how the story was being told than with the dogs themselves. The decision to hire formerly incarcerated people came from exactly the same instinct that had led her to bring Tatanka home. It began with one person recently out of prison, then expanded to include 2 teenage brothers, Kanani and Kelly Chalk, who went by Mo, friends of her daughters who were struggling to find stable ground and a reason to stay on it. Those two stayed at Villa Lobos and became irreplaceable. Their presence transformed the rescue into something that couldn't have existed without them, a place where the animals most people had given up on and the people most systems had discarded learned the same lesson at the same time. Someone showing up changes what you're capable of. A profile in Los Angeles magazine noticed what was being built. Television producers followed shortly after. When donations began declining, Tia agreed to let Animal Planet document what was already happening. Pit Bulls and Parolees launched in 2009 and found its audience almost from the first episode. California eventually became a wall she couldn't get through. Permit costs for large-scale kennels in Los Angeles County climbed past what Villa Lobos could carry. New regulations closed off options that had previously kept the operation viable. The broader economic environment offered no cushion. Rather than scale back what she'd built, Tia moved all of it, over 200 pit bulls, other animals, her 4 children, and several parolees, across the entire country to New Orleans, Louisiana. The logistics of that move were something else entirely. Moving trucks, a converted motorhome she named the Doggy Limo, and a repurposed school bus all served as animal transport across multiple cross-country trips. On January 1, 2011, the final 50 dogs arrived in Louisiana, and Villa Lobos had its new home. New Orleans already had history with Tia. She had done animal rescue work there in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and the city's particular kind of hard-earned resilience felt familiar in ways that made the choice feel right rather than desperate. What began as one Louisiana facility grew steadily into multiple locations across Louisiana and Texas, and Villa Lobos became one of the largest pit bull rescue operations anywhere in the country. For 19 seasons, Pit Bulls and Parolees aired on Animal Planet, and what it accomplished was less obvious than it looked. It made audiences care, genuinely care, about two groups that American culture had collectively decided were beyond sympathy. Pit Bulls and Parolees, the two things most people cross the street to avoid, became the center of a show that ran for nearly a decade and a half. Viewers followed Tia and her family through the failed Tehachapi relocation attempt in 2011, when Kern County pulled permits at the last moment and cost the rescue serious money and momentum it couldn't easily recover. They watched storm damage tear through the New Orleans facility in 2021. They watched men who had spent years inside a prison system learn patience and care from dogs who had spent their lives being feared and abandoned. The cancellation arrived in 2022 as a direct consequence of Warner Bros. Discovery acquiring Discovery Communications, a corporate decision made far above any level where Tia had influence or voice. Filming had already stopped more than a year before the official announcement, and the uncertainty had been slowly draining Villa Lobos' financial stability throughout that entire period. When the end was confirmed, it landed on an operation that had been depending on the show's reach for donations, adoption volume, and public awareness to sustain hundreds of animals. The steady income disappeared overnight, and the work had to continue regardless. Tia's personal life had been carrying weight through all of this that rarely made it onto the screen. Her 2006 marriage to Aaron Marcus Jackson, a man with a documented criminal history that included a serious confrontation with law enforcement, was a direct lived expression of the philosophy she applied to the rescue itself. People who have made serious mistakes are still people, and they still deserve the chance to build something better. That marriage ended in divorce, a fact she shared publicly on Facebook in 2018 with the same openness she brought to everything difficult in her life. Her 4 children, daughters Tia Torres and Mariah Clementine, and adopted twin sons Kanani and Mo, grew up inside the rescue and never really left. They became the operational backbone of Villa Lobos, each carrying forward the same conviction about second chances that their mother had been putting into practice since before any of them were old enough to understand what it meant. While she was already managing the financial fallout from cancellation, a legal fight arrived that had nothing to do with the television industry and everything to do with betrayal that came from inside her own rescue. People she had trusted left behind a scene she described as devastating. Abandoned dogs, animals that had died in deplorable conditions, filth, and stolen property. Among what they took were 5 pit bulls the rescue had been caring for. Those 5 became known as the Crescent City 5. Criminal charges, animal cruelty, theft, and illegal weapons possession were filed against the individuals in Michigan. What nobody anticipated was the civil lawsuit that followed, with those same individuals demanding Tia return the 5 dogs to their custody. She described the moment she found out with barely concealed disbelief, saying she was still shaking her head at the absurdity of people facing animal cruelty charges suing for custody of the animals they allegedly harmed. A court order then prevented her from discussing the case publicly for over a year, a particular kind of stress, watching the situation unfold while legally silenced. Legal costs reached $100,000. To keep the rescue operational during the fight, she sold equipment and assets that Villa Lobos had taken years to build up. The lawsuit was eventually dismissed. The Crescent City Five were freed to go to permanent homes. Tia credited a supporter named Carolyn J. Penn Martin with keeping the effort and the dogs visible throughout the entire ordeal, and in Carolyn's memory, she committed to moving forward with what she called renewed hope. To replace the show's lost income, Tia partnered with Early Release Media and launched Rabid Reality, a subscription streaming service structured as a nonprofit, built entirely around funding Villa Lobos Rescue Center. The content lineup included Life with the Underdogs, which documented ongoing rescue operations, The Big Easy Boys following parolees through the streets of New Orleans, and podcasts including Cell Dogs and Dog Diaries. 4 subscription tiers made it accessible at different price points, and Early Release Media built the entire streaming infrastructure from the ground up. The problem was that the infrastructure kept breaking. Subscriber complaints about technical failures were steady, and less than a year after launch, Tia shut the platform down. Creative differences with members of the production team contributed to the decision, and she acknowledged that directly and publicly, while offering refunds to anyone who hadn't been able to use the service properly before it closed. What came after was deliberately smaller and more direct. Her existing Patreon account became the primary support channel, with monthly subscriptions ranging from $3 to $25, giving supporters a clear line to Villa Lobos. A YouTube channel for the rescue carried the content forward. Life with the Underdogs continued, joined by new additions including Tia Torres Unmuzzled 25 to Wife, and Moto Maidens, a documentary series following an all-female motorcycle group. Less overhead, less technical complexity, and far more control over what was being built and how. The financial scale was smaller, but the connection to supporters became more direct and considerably more stable. And the rescue kept going. The same rescue that had started because a teenager refused to leave a dog behind, that grew because a counselor applied the same logic to people, and that survived because one woman kept making the same choice over and over again, that giving up simply wasn't something she was willing to learn.